Hello, hello. What is up, Pitt fans? Thank you so much for tuning in to Inside the Panthers on YouTube. My name is Stephen Thompson, coming at you with another Inside Pitt post-game report. Panthers have just fallen 28-13 to Syracuse in, as we will address in a minute, a very, very ugly game. Hope you're not distracted by Ole Miss, Georgia in the background. Maybe you're watching that game yourself, trying to watch some good football for a change. Seemed like it was a good game from what I could tell, but wait for a few more people to maybe file in here. See what kind of crowd we can get going before we get this stream moving. Because there's a lot to talk about. I type up a little list of show notes before I do one of these, and it's a little bit of a scramble sometimes. You got a head full of thoughts after a game like that, and a lot you feel like you want to talk about, but then you try to put them together into something somewhat coherent on a pretty short turnaround, and this one was pretty difficult. I mean, just going through everything that went wrong, everything that was weird and odd, and just I don't know, made you scratch your head, and then trying to fit it into some kind of I don't know, some kind of box and some kind of category, and I break it up into the regular organization of how I do the normal shows, and it's harder. It's harder after a game like that because there's just not only is there so much to go through, but you've also got to kind of, you know, like you've got to like I said, fit this all into a box, but then have some kind of analysis and some eye towards the future. And after a game like this, it's hard, man. It's hard to try to think about where this team is headed and what it's capable of over the final 3 games of the year, whether that matters what they're capable of. Stuff, stuff, but we will try to do it. I'll take any questions that anyone has. As I move through this, obviously I've got some notes to go through and talk about some stuff I thought was notable from the game, and just kind of a long-term big view, a big 30,000-foot view of what this loss means for this team, what this season means for this team. Because quite honestly, at this point, I think we're all ready to draw conclusions about what has happened in 2023, the disappointing things that have happened. I mean, we can sit through these last 2 games. They could win both of them, and I'm not sure it'll change anyone's perspective. I think we can pretty assuredly uh, tie a bow, or put a bow at least on our interpretation of 2023, and start to look towards 2024. Because man, this was I think one of those, when you got to the other side of Florida State and Notre Dame, this is one of those games where you thought, okay, this is a benchmark where Pitt can kind of compare themselves to a peer, another Power Five opponent who's struggling a little bit, and it was a winnable game. And when you don't win the winnable games, I mean, things start to get real ugly, and you have to really ask yourself some tough questions. So, we can go ahead and get right into it. I mean, like I said at the top, hello, Pitt fans. Thank you for tuning in to Inside the Panthers on YouTube. My name is Stephen Thompson, coming at you with another Inside Pitt post-game report. The Panthers have just lost 28-13 to Syracuse at Yankee Stadium in the Bronx. An ugly game, really from top to bottom, and an abject failure in a myriad of ways: offense, defense, special teams. It is extremely hard to draw any kind of positive from a game like that. And it's just funny to look at that score, 28-13, and that is what the I mean, look, I've got Pitt's, final scores up in front of me right now, and it's oh no, those are Syracuse's. Excuse me. I've got Pitt's right here, and just by point differential, it is not even. There are 1, 2, 3, 4 losses in the past. Yeah, going back to week 4. So, there are 4 losses that are by a bigger margin, but I don't think any have really been this deflating on their own. I mean, you can talk about Notre Dame as being deflating, but I think that came a lot from the post game as well, and just what Pat Narduzzi said after that game and the reaction from the players as well. But the game alone was disappointing in too many ways to count. I mean, we can run through some of my I wrote favorite in my show notes. That's probably not the right. I mean, the most notable, the ones that gave me pause, that made me kind of chuckle a little bit at certain points, but also just kind of you do a face palm sometimes. I mean, there was right off the bat giving up 9 plays of positive yard or nine plays of positive yardage and 10 plays on that opening touchdown drive. I mean, they were not prepared from the beginning. Um, you know, we'll get to it in a minute, but Pat Narduzzi said that as much himself. And you like say what you want about not being prepared, but I mean, there were even for what Syracuse was throwing at them, and that was certainly a storyline. Is that Syracuse showed them a ton of stuff on offense that they just didn't run before this week, and that's a credit to Syracuse for being able to execute like that. But it was weird. It was certainly weird. I think you can almost give Pitt a little bit of grace, especially at the beginning of that game for maybe not being on their P's and Q's right away. But I mean, even when Pitt was in the right position to make plays against that offense, they just missed tackles. They just didn't finish plays even when they were put in the right position to. So for as much as they were caught off guard, even when they were right where they needed to be, it was still bad. And you watch that opening touchdown drive. You watch a first quarter in which Syracuse runs for, I believe, 113 yards. Yeah, 113 yards in a quarter, and runs up a 7-3 advantage. And then Pat Narduzzi shows up on your television screen and tells you that, yeah, we had no idea what we were doing on defense there. Like, we have to adjust on the fly. We didn't know it was coming. Um, which, like I said, I mean, you can almost excuse them a little bit. I mean, it was certainly an odd situation, and for them to try to make adjustments on the fly like that is hard. I mean, when stuff doesn't show up on film, there's only so much you can do to prepare for it, which is nothing. I mean, they would have had to predict something way far out that they had no idea was coming, in order to be prepared for that. And so I understand why they weren't, but I mean, even understanding all that, to have the head coach of your football team pop up during a sideline interview with the ACC network and say, "Yeah, we don't know what's going on." That is the least encouraging thing that you could possibly hear from your head coach. That is, I don't know how anyone's supposed to react any way other than negatively and feel like this was a lost game from the start. It was, I like I said, I get it. Like, he was put in a tough spot, but like that's still not encouraging. Like, no one has to feel positive about that when they see their head coach pop up, their defensive minded head coach pop up on a TV screen and say that they don't know what they're doing. They're just not ready for today. And then the most infuriating thing was that they adjusted. They adjusted and then relented again. They let up 113 yards in the rushing yards in the first quarter, like I said. Then gave up only 40 in the second quarter. Then in the third quarter, they come back out and they give up another 113 yards on the ground, or 109 yards on the ground. Excuse me, I'm reading this wrong. Yeah, 108 rush yards in the first quarter, and then 32 yards on the ground in the second quarter, and then 109 rushing yards in the third quarter, and 133 rushing yards in the fourth quarter. Just brutal numbers after it seemed like you had finally maybe started to get a grip on this thing. And, going back to that first drive, maybe it was the second drive, I can't remember exactly, but Brandon George poking a Syracuse player in the eye while that Syracuse player is at the bottom of the pile. I mean, what the hell? What the hell was that? How he didn't get any kind of punishment or consequence for that is completely beyond me. And it was blatant. And like, I don't know everything about Brandon George, but through all of my interactions and having watched him play for a little bit, like, that seems completely out of character, hopefully out of character for him. I mean, I've never seen him do anything like that before. But we can talk about penalties all day, and Pitt is, I believe, the most penalized team in the ACC still. I mean, even after today, when I think I don't have their numbers in front of me, but they committed quite a few penalties as well today. Definitely not as much as many as they normally did, or as they did last week against Florida State. But uh, they like what George did was undisciplined in a completely different way, and it was. I want to say undisciplined play, but that was behavior, and that's bad, and that is bad in a very public way. The ACC Network announcers were calling it out, saying that it was not just dirty, but it was soft. That's and to watch them get run over and then to get called soft for pulling out a cheap shot. I mean that doesn't look good. And that was one I just that felt like a completely losing the plot kind of moment where just your player commits like a pretty dirty act that should have been ruled a personal foul. He's getting jawed at and trying to ignore it by the guy that he pokes in the eye. It was just that one was ugly. And then somehow this got uglier. I mean, you got uglier for reasons on the field. The disaster in the second quarter where they try to attempt a field goal from like medium distance. I think might have ended up being like a 49-yarder all in all, but well within Ben Sauls's range. Then they get a false start to back him up. Then they take a timeout before punting from their own territory to avoid a delay of game that would not really have that honestly, when you watch when you watch the punt play out after that, probably could have helped them. But then they punt into the end zone, and three coverage guys for Pitt are just standing in the end zone, watching it bounce in there. That's just poor coaching and bad awareness from the players. Like, I don't know, you've done punt coverage over and over again throughout the season, and you get to this point in the year, you get to week 10 and you don't know how to look for the ball, how to know where you are on the field in relation to the end zone and where you need to be to field a punt. I mean, that's one of the more disappointing things is because Caleb Junko actually gives you a good kick and you can't pick him up on the other end. Then there's 4 second half turnovers. 2 were just simple handoffs that Christian Veyer has to, like, I mean, really any quarterback at any level of football, quite honestly, has to be able to make, and he just bungles them. There was one fumble that was a bad break, in my opinion, a bad call on Rodney Hammond, who has played well the past 2 or 3 games, in my opinion, and just gets the wrong end of a whistle. But then there was another horrendous decision and throw by Veyer, who at best that's a miscommunication with his receiver, and that's almost as bad because those miscommunications happen all the time. And for a guy this was his 5th start, I believe, 5th start, like you can live with some some kind of disjointedness, excuse me, on offense, and but that, I mean, it's just been constant. It's been every game, and it's been really consequential at big moments. I'll get to one question here, and feel free to throw any other questions that you have in that little chat function. But Byron asks how many players I see going into the or coming in through the portal. I mean, look, I don't know if I have a number in mind until they actually go through the process of phasing out guys who leave, because I don't know what that number looks like, quite honestly. Because I think Pitt has some talent here, and I think there's a way that Narduzzi and the rest of the coaching staff could sell them on, look, they're talented players here. We can put something together. You guys are just young. Give us some time to work with you. But then again, like, I assume some coaching changes are going to happen. I assume guys have connections to those coaches. So how many guys are going to feel that they want to find a different opportunity with a coach that they really trust? They don't want to, leave that in Pat Narduzzi's hands to pick their new position coach or their new offensive coordinator or something like that. So I expect there to be, honestly, I mean, Narduzzi's done pretty well retaining players even through bad seasons. I felt like, through the transfer portal, you don't hear a ton about, complete, widespread malcontent, but I think this year is different. So I do think 20 is a lot. Like that's a pretty hefty number. If you gave me an over under on, 20 players coming in, 20 players going out, I would take the under on that. But I do think there will be some pretty significant roster overhaul. And while 20 may be a lot, I think it's they're going to lose a bunch of guys, and they're going to lose guys that kind of make you concerned. You're going to lose at least 1 or 2 guys that you're like, wow, that's a pretty significant blow to what they have coming last year. It's just a hunch, that's not actually coming from, anything completely solid. I don't have any information. This is just kind of speculation and judging off the way college sports are going right now and just the state that Pitt is in right now. But I mean, I know I just rattled off a bunch of, individual moments from this game that I thought were bad and notable, but the depths to which this team looked unprepared and overmatched against the Syracuse team that has not won a game in conference. They're riding a 5-game losing streak. They have one win against a Power 5 opponent, and it's Purdue. Uh, it just like it's completely and utterly embarrassing. It's a top to bottom failure, like I said, and there's only so much analysis that you can do of the finer moments in this game and this game alone, because so many of the same things that we've seen and bemoaned all season were present this afternoon, just to honestly a progressively worse degree, and that keeps happening. Just they keep doing the same things poorly, and they do them worse and worse with each week. And I think that's for you've seen flashes of improvement from this team, but you haven't seen anything wholesale and you haven't seen anything consistent. So at the end of the day, all you're left with is really a desire to run out the clock and see what this program can maybe do with the reset. Uh, because all you're left to do is look towards the future at this point. It's not there's nothing left to do with this year. I mean, even if they win, I think I said this at the top of the broadcast, but even if they win these last 2 games, what do you take away? What does your opinion change on them if they're of them if they're 4-8 versus 2-10? I mean, mine doesn't. I'll get to a question here. I think it's a relevant one because I'm about to lead into kind of a longer term view of this team. But would you fire the entire offensive staff? Who would you keep, if any? Well, I think the obvious one is Frank Signetti can't stay around. I mean, look, you've gotten 2 years of I don't want to say the same results because they're not, but it's pretty easy to draw a direct line from what Israel Abanda did to the fact that they were able to average, I think, close to 30 points a game last year. And you don't have a game changing talent like that this year, and you see the results of it. And you just see Frank Signetti's ability to scheme things up, to coach their quarterbacks in a way that and develop quarterbacks in a way that makes them better. So Cincinnati, obviously, I think everyone can kind of agree that he's going to be the first one to go. I think Taekwon Underwood's got to stay. I think he's a good recruiter. I think you can very easily point to a ton of improvements that Kanate Mumfield made over the offseason into this year. The improvements that Bub Means made in season this year. I mean, even going back to last year, I thought he was much better towards the end of the year. His play is maybe a little bit dependent on quarterback play, but I think Taekwon Underwood's got to stay, receivers coach. Tim Salem, I think, should stay as well. You know, he's been a passing game coordinator, been helpful with the kind of schematic side of the offense. He's recruited really well. He's New Jersey, New York, and I think some other states in kind of the Mid-Atlantic, Northeast are his territory, and he's recruited those well. So you got to keep him. And then who else am I missing on the offensive side of the ball? I'm still I mean, that leaves Dave Borbley, offensive line coach, and Andre Powell, running backs coach / special teams coordinator. At the very least, Andre Powell cannot be your special teams coordinator next year. I mean, as Jim points out in the comments, I mean, the punt coverage thing that I referenced earlier, that happened at the beginning of the year. It was supposed to be getting cleaned up. The punting issues from last year were supposed to be getting cleaned up. They didn't. Ben Sauls has regressed. I think there's a good stat from Noah Hiles, the Post Gazette, that I don't have in front of me right now, from the Notre Dame game where Sauls has missed a bunch of his field goals from long range. He hasn't been nearly as reliable from, I think, outside of 45 yards this year as he was before. Like, there's clear regression in the special teams. But quite honestly, I think his work with the running backs has still been pretty fine. You can question the rotation, but I think that's been a whole staff thing. Like, I don't think Pat Narduzzi is letting I don't think Pat Narduzzi and Frank Signetti necessarily are letting Andre call all of the shots as far as, Sibo versus Rodney versus, Daniel Carter. Like, the rotation was weird at the beginning of the year, but I think that was more of a whole staff thing. So I don't know if I can pin that entirely on Powell. So I lean towards saying Powell should stay, but only as the running backs coach. Definitely not as special teams coach, but I can see the argument either way. Dave Borbley is the other one, offensive line coach, where I'm much more willing to give him him some grace, especially compared to what I don't know. I feel like the general sentiment among Pitt fans has been he's got to be one of the first guys to go, and I'm not sure I necessarily agree with that. I mean, Pitt's played all of the season without or all of the season without one starter, 75% of the season without another starter on the offensive line. After Matt Goncalves went down, Jake Cradle and Blake Zuvovic were hurt for a good bit of this year too. You're playing a true freshman in BJ Williams. Jason Collier is kind of your backup right guard. A 6-year senior hasn't done much of anything. Ryan Baer's getting thrown into his first starts. Terrence Moore had to make his first starts. I think you can be critical of some of the development stuff he does. Like Blake Zuvovic and Jake Cradle have not been very good this year. Those are old guys who've been in the program for a while. And quite honestly, it felt like they took steps back this year. But then on the flip side of that, I mean, Branson Taylor's been pretty solid this year. Terrence Moore has been a revelation at center. Feels like you got a future with that guy there. I mean, he's recruited decently well. I mean, getting Jacoby and Bear in, I felt like those were good. That was good moves too. That's a feather in his cap as well. So I'm not in on necessarily firing Dave Borbley. I think I understand the argument, but I still lean keeping him. So I think, if I was thinking about the offensive staff, you got to get rid of Signetti. You keep Salem, you keep Underwood, you keep Powell, but change his job, and I guess you keep Borbley. And the more I talk it, the more I say it out loud, the more it just seems like it sounds a lot like running it back. But I mean, you bring in a new offensive coordinator, who knows what happens? Maybe you unlock something with the talent you got. But that's a good question. I appreciate the question, Adam. Keep them coming if you got them. Happy to answer as many as we can as we keep moving forward. But getting into a little bit more about what this really says about the future. And I referenced this, I think, prior to the Notre Dame game a couple times, and maybe after. But coaches who win just 2 games in a season at Pitt don't survive, at least not for long. I don't have the exact number that I pulled up a few weeks ago, but every single coach that has won 2 or fewer games has been fired within 3 years, or has not been the head coach within after 3 years since winning 2 games in a season. Looks like that's where Pat Narduzzi's headed. I mean, Boston College got the brakes beat off them today by Virginia Tech, but I mean, Pitt got the brakes beat off of them by Virginia Tech too, and Boston College has so many things that Pitt does not. They have an identity. They have a quarterback that they believe in. They have a pretty decent defense. They have some skill position weapons that are pretty good. So I'm far from saying that Pitt can pull out a win there, and that's your easiest one before you head on the road to face Duke. The other thing is you're coming off a short week when you face Boston College next week on a Thursday night, and then you got to go play Duke, who's gonna just suffocate them defensively. It is. I mean, you thought the Pitt passing game has looked bad over the past few weeks. I really cannot imagine what Duke is going to do to them, because they have strangled much more talented teams for much longer and done it pretty easily. So we're staring at 2-10. 2-10 usually is a kiss of death for Pitt coaches, quite honestly. Pat Narduzzi's not getting fired at the end of this year. I think you can put that to rest. I don't think that was a worry. Unless Pitt has way deeper pockets than I realized, they can't afford to buy him out. So he gets one more season to right the ship. But to be honest, I'm not sure what righting the ship looks like. There are fundamental problems with this team, and they start with coaching, but they've trickled down all the way to the players on the field and into the base of talent that this team has to build on moving forward. Changes need to be made. We went over a couple of them, at least on the offensive side of the ball. And to that point, I think a lot of the defensive coaches stay too. I don't think you can really make a good argument that any of those guys deserve to go. But changes will be made in all likelihood. Some will be major, some minor. Some will be anticipated, some will not. That's transfers, decommitments, coach firings and hirings. Narduzzi has a lot of work just to even keep this operation whole, just to keep them pointed in a certain direction and to show that he has a vision for this thing moving forward. But there's some deep rot here, man. Like, there is always something structurally wrong with a team that goes 2-8. That doesn't happen on accident. You can you can bad luck your way, you can injury your way into 4-8 even, definitely 5-7, like, to dip below your standard, man, that stuff happens, to every coach, even good coaches, but, man, 2-8 is hard to dance around. That's hard to it's impossible to I don't know. Teams with good foundations don't go 2-8, and that's what I thought Pitt had, but it's pretty clear that they don't, 2-8 is 2-8, and you can't talk yourself around that so much. And at this point, I think it's fair to ask just how much of a recovery is possible. So, I mean, you ask yourself, what does next year look like for Pitt? What does righting the ship really look like? I assume it means, bowl. You get into maybe some more granular stuff about like, okay, we need to see improvements from this player and this player. Like Vayer's got to get better. You got to find a quarterback of the future. You got to be able to keep guys in the program that you think are talented, and then those guys have to make progress throughout the season. But at this point in kind of Narduzzi's tenure, with the way college sports are heading, and in an increasingly impatient world and industry of college football, how much time can you afford Narduzzi to turn this thing around and to get you back to the level where you are competitive? Not even let's put aside competing for ACC championships and beyond, or even a spot in the ACC championship. Uh, how close are you to competing for a bowl again? How close are you to making up those 4 wins to get you back into contention or to make you respectable? Um, and I don't really know the answer to that. And then, like, jumping off of that, like, will that be enough? Would making a bowl, like, be enough to make you believe that, "Oh, that was a blip. Narduzzi's got us back on track. We're right where we were. We're ready to go. We're back to competing." 'Cause I don't think just, like, a simple bowl bid does that. I think you gotta do a little bit more, like, and that's a pretty unlucky place for him to be because there are a ton of holes in this roster, holes that I don't think he has either the capacity is not the right word, but just willingness to engage in the kind of wholesale roster overhaul that it might need to get this team back to a contending level in that short of a time frame. Uh, and then I don't know if Pitt is the type of place that can do that anyway. Like, period. Like, can they bring in the type of players after a year like this to make an impact and make this thing and turn everything around in like I said, such a short time frame? Because we can be realistic about what Narduzzi can do to improve, and like what's reasonable to expect of him next year. But the one question you ask off of that is, okay, does being realistic matter? Because Pitt wants to be in a certain place. Pitt can only afford to be in a certain place. They can't afford to wait this long for a guy to catch up after so much of the goodwill that he built got undone so quickly. And I think that's what we won't really know until the end of the year when the dust kind of settles. We know who's in house, who's out of house, who are we going to start this next stage with. And so that's why I'm kind of left with the idea of running out the clock and just feeling like I don't really know how much more there is left to say about this season before it's finally over and we can do a real detailed dive and a post-mortem into what went wrong and what you need to fix. Um, I any of you who have actually kept up with me and what I've written and said through this entire year knows that I made a series of bold predictions at the beginning of the year. One of them was that Pitt would go 10-2. So I clearly never imagined that we would be anywhere close to this state. And I don't think anyone else did too. I mean, I thought at worst they're going bowling. Like, I saw that 6.5 win total, and I thought that is the easiest money that anyone can make in the world would be to bet that Pitt wins more than 6.5 games this year. And I was horribly, horribly wrong. So to an extent, I'm still kind of picking up the pieces of this season, and I'm still trying to figure out where Pitt goes after all this happens. But I appreciate you all tuning in. We've reached about a half hour. I feel like that's a good place to leave it. I'm gonna head out of here. Thank you all for tuning in to another Inside Pitt post game report. Appreciate the questions and people who jumped in to comment. Misery loves company, but make sure to stay tuned with us into tomorrow. We'll have some more content up on InsideThePanthers.com, breaking down this loss and what it means for Pitt moving forward, how they're going to attack kind of the next stage of things. And then we got some basketball this week. If you're looking for something a little bit more hopeful, we got a basketball game on Monday. I'll have another post-game report after that game on this channel, so make sure to subscribe to us on YouTube. That's youtube.com/@InsideThePanthers to check out what we got going on there. And then, like I said, follow reporting from that game, from the remainder of this Pitt football season and the basketball season we got moving forward at InsideThePanthers.com. Like I said, thanks to everyone for tuning in, and I will see you all next time.